The morning mist clung to the rolling hills surrounding Camilla's private estate, like a shroud of secrecy. Inside the grand manor house, she moved through her morning routine with practiced elegance, unaware that her peaceful world was about to shatter. The estate, a magnificent Georgian mansion she had inherited from her first marriage, had always been her sanctuary away from the constant scrutiny of royal life. In the ornate jewelry room on the second floor, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting rainbow patterns across glass display cases. Among the collection of precious gems and family heirlooms sat a particularly stunning piece, a diamond and sapphire tiara that had once graced the head of the late Queen, Elizabeth Sayre. The intricate design featured cascading diamonds arranged like frozen tears, with deep blue sapphires that seemed to hold the depth of ocean storms. This wasn't just any tiara from the royal collection. It was the Queen's personal favorite, worn during intimate family gatherings and cherished private moments. The piece had mysteriously disappeared from the royal vault 6 months after the Queen's passing, causing considerable concern among palace officials. Various theories had circulated about its whereabouts, but no one suspected it had found its way to Camilla's private collection. The discovery of its location came through an unlikely source, a former palace staff member who had been quietly dismissed for reasons unrelated to theft. During a routine interview with investigators looking into missing royal artifacts, she mentioned seeing the distinctive tiara during a private visit to Camilla's estate. The revelation sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the royal household. Captain James Morrison, head of the Royal Protection Command, received the sensitive briefing on a gray Tuesday morning. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling enough to warrant immediate action. The tiara's unique identifying marks, including a small scratch on one of the sapphires and a specific engraving on the inner band, had been photographed during the staff member's visit. Expert gemologists confirmed these details matched the missing piece exactly. As Morrison reviewed the case files in his secure office at Buckingham Palace, the weight of the situation became clear. This wasn't simply about recovering stolen property. It was about protecting the monarchy's reputation and maintaining the sacred trust between the crown and its jewels. The tiara represented not just monetary value but centuries of royal heritage and the personal memory of Britain's longest reigning monarch. The decision to act came from the very top of the royal hierarchy. King Charles III, though undoubtedly conflicted about investigating his own wife, understood that justice and the integrity of the crown jewels took precedence over personal relationships. The monarch's duty to the nation and its treasures superseded all other considerations, even the most intimate family bonds. Morrison assembled his most trusted team of royal guards, each sworn to absolute secrecy. These weren't ordinary security officers, but elite professionals trained in the most sensitive royal operations. They had protected heads of state, recovered priceless artifacts, and handled diplomatic crises that never made the headlines. This mission would test all their skills and discretion. The legal groundwork was laid carefully and quietly. Royal lawyers worked through the night to ensure every aspect of the operation would be legally sound. Search warrants were obtained through sealed court proceedings, with only a handful of judges aware of the true nature of the case. The paperwork was ironclad, leaving no room for legal challenges that might embarrass the crown. Meanwhile, intelligence officers conducted discreet surveillance of the estate, mapping security systems, staff schedules, and Camilla's daily routines. They noted the location of the jewelry room, the mansion's multiple entrances, and potential complications that might arise during the operation. Every detail was catalogued and contingency plans were developed for various scenarios. The psychological impact on the royal family was immense, though carefully hidden from public view. Palace insiders spoke in hushed tones about the unprecedented situation of investigating the Queen consort herself. The delicate balance between family loyalty and royal duty created tension that rippled through the corridors of power, affecting everyone from senior courtiers to junior staff members. As the final preparations were made, Morrison couldn't help but reflect on the gravity of what they were about to undertake. In his 20-year career protecting the royal family, he had never faced a situation that required such a delicate balance of force, diplomacy, and absolute discretion. The success of this operation would either restore faith in the royal institutions, integrity, or potentially create the biggest constitutional Crisis in modern British history. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the very foundations of royal protocol, family loyalty, and justice. As dawn broke over the English countryside, the royal guard prepared to storm the estate of the Queen Consort herself, armed with legal authority, unwavering determination, and the weight of centuries of royal tradition behind them. The convoy of black Range Rovers moved through the early morning darkness like shadows across the countryside. Captain Morrison sat in the lead vehicle, reviewing the operation plan one final time while his team maintained radio silence. The vehicles bore no royal markings or official insignia, designed to appear like any other wealthy estate visit until the moment of truth arrived. At precisely 6 o'clock in the morning, the convoy turned through the ornate iron gates of Camillas' estate. The security guard, recognizing the official vehicles but surprised by the early hour, hesitated before opening the gates. Morrison's team had deliberately chosen this time, knowing that Camilla typically enjoyed her morning tea in the conservatory around 7:30, giving them a crucial window of opportunity. The estate grounds stretched across hundreds of acres of meticulously maintained gardens, ancient oak trees and winding gravel paths. The main house, built in the 1780s, stood majestically against the morning sky with its honey-colored stone facade and countless windows that had witnessed centuries of British history. Peacocks roamed freely across the lawns, their magnificent tail feathers catching the first rays of sunlight. Inside the mansion, Camilla's personal staff were beginning their daily routines, completely unaware of the approaching storm. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Patricia Williams, had served the estate for over 15 years and took pride in maintaining the highest standards of service. She was arranging fresh flowers in the main hall when she noticed the unusual number of vehicles approaching through the front windows. Morrison's team moved with military precision, each member knowing their specific role and objective. Sergeant Davies and Constable Thompson secured the perimeter, while Inspector Reynolds and Officer Martinez prepared to accompany Morrison into the house. Their uniforms were impeccable, their bearing professional, and their resolve absolute despite the unprecedented nature of their mission. The captain approached the main entrance, his footsteps echoing on the stone steps that had welcomed countless distinguished guests over the decades. The heavy oak door, carved with intricate patterns and fitted with brass hardware that gleamed like gold, seemed to symbolize the barrier between public duty and private privilege they were about to cross. Mrs. Williams answered the door, her confusion evident as she took in the sight of the official delegation. Morrison presented his credentials and the sealed warrant with calm authority, explaining that they were there on urgent royal business. The housekeeper's face paled as she realized the gravity of the situation, her hands trembling slightly as she invited them inside. The interior of the mansion was breathtaking, with soaring ceilings decorated with elaborate plasterwork, oil paintings of distinguished ancestors, and furniture that represented centuries of refined taste and accumulated wealth. Persian rugs covered polished wooden floors, and crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light patterns across silk wallpaper that had been specially commissioned from France. Word spread quickly through the household staff, creating an atmosphere of nervous tension and whispered speculation. The cook, Mr. Harrison, peered cautiously from the kitchen doorway while the groundskeeper watched from outside, all trying to understand what could bring the royal guard to their peaceful estate at such an unusual hour. The very air seemed to crackle with anticipation and fear. Morrison requested that Camilla be informed of their arrival, emphasizing the urgency and official nature of their visit. Mrs. Williams climbed the grand staircase, her usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps as she approached her employer's private quarters. The morning routine that had been perfectly ordered just minutes before now felt fragile and uncertain. In her bedroom suite, Camilla was selecting jewelry for the day from an antique mahogany cabinet that had belonged to her grandmother. The morning light streaming through the tall windows highlighted the elegant pieces arranged in velvet-lined compartments. She had always found comfort in beautiful things, viewing them as connections to history and family heritage rather than mere displays of wealth. When Mrs. Williams knocked softly and entered with obvious distress, Camilla immediately sensed something was seriously wrong. The housekeeper's usual composed demeanor had been replaced by visible anxiety, and her voice shook slightly as she explained about the royal guard's unexpected arrival. The news struck Camilla like a physical blow, though she struggled to maintain her composure. The realization that official investigators were in her home, asking to speak with her about royal business, sent a chill through her entire being. Years of royal training and maintaining dignity under pressure now served her well. But privately, her mind raced through possible explanations for this unprecedented visit. Deep down, a growing dread suggested she knew exactly why they had come. As she prepared to face whatever awaited her downstairs, Camilla caught sight of herself in the antique mirror that had reflected the faces of the estate's mistresses for over 2 centuries. The woman looking back appeared calm and regal, but her eyes betrayed the fear that was building in her chest like a gathering storm. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything she had built and protected. The royal guard waited below, armed with legal authority and damning evidence, while upstairs, the queen consort prepared to defend not just her reputation but her very place in the royal family. The peaceful morning had transformed into the opening act of a drama that would shake the foundations of the modern monarchy. The drawing room had witnessed countless conversations over the centuries, but none quite like the one about to unfold. Camilla descended the main staircase with practiced grace, her silk morning dress rustling softly against the marble steps. Every movement was measured and controlled, years of royal training evident in her posture despite the turmoil she felt inside. The ornate grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, marking what might become the most significant hour of her life. Captain Morrison rose respectfully as she entered the room, his team maintaining professional distance while remaining alert to every nuance of the situation. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across Persian rugs and illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to history in the making. The room's elegant furnishings, antique sofas upholstered in cream silk, mahogany side tables bearing fresh flowers, and oil paintings of pastoral scenes, created an atmosphere of refined civilization that contrasted sharply with the tension of the moment. Morrison began with formal courtesy, addressing her as Your Majesty, while presenting his credentials and explaining the nature of their visit. His voice remained steady and professional, but Camilla could detect the underlying gravity of the situation in his careful choice of words. The captain explained that they were investigating the disappearance of several items from the royal collection, including a specific tiara that had belonged personally to the late Queen Elizabeth II. The mention of the tiara sent a visible shock through Camilla's composed exterior. Her hands folded elegantly in her lap, tightened almost imperceptibly, and a slight flush colored her cheeks. She had always been skilled at concealing her emotions, but this revelation struck at the heart of her deepest fears. The late Queen's tiara wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of royal heritage and personal memory that she had convinced herself she deserved to possess. Morrison continued his explanation with diplomatic precision, outlining the evidence that had led them to her estate. He mentioned witness testimony, photographic evidence, and expert analysis that had identified the missing tiara's presence in her private collection. Each piece of evidence he presented was like a stone added to a wall of accusation that was becoming impossible to climb over or tear down. Camilla's response was carefully measured, though observers could detect the strain in her voice. She expressed surprise and concern about the allegations, suggesting there might be some misunderstanding about the pieces in her collection. She claimed that all her jewelry had been acquired through legitimate means, gifts, inheritances, or personal purchases made over many years. Her explanation was plausible, but lacked the ring of complete truth that Morrison's trained ear was accustomed to hearing. The captain presented the search warrant with formal authority, explaining their legal right to examine the premises and any items of interest to their investigation. The document bore the royal seal and had been signed by the highest judicial authorities, making it clear that this was not a request, but a lawful command. Camilla studied the warrant carefully, her legal training from years past helping her understand the full implications of what was happening. As they prepared to search the house, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Staff members moved about their duties with obvious nervousness, whispering among themselves about the unprecedented situation. The head butler, Mr. Geoffrey Hartwell, maintained his professional demeanor while clearly struggling with the conflict between loyalty to his employer and respect for royal authority. His position as a long-serving member of the household made him privy to many secrets, and his discomfort was evident to everyone present. The search began systematically, with Morrison's team displaying both thoroughness and respect for the property. They moved through the ground floor rooms, the library with its leather-bound volumes and comfortable reading chairs, the music room with its grand piano and collection of sheet music, the dining room with its massive oak table that could seat 20 guests. Each room was examined carefully but without unnecessary disruption, reflecting the team's understanding of the delicate nature of their mission. Camilla accompanied the search party, maintaining her composure while internally calculating her options. She knew that once they reached the jewelry room upstairs, the game would effectively be over. The tiara was there, displayed prominently among her collection, and there would be no way to explain its presence convincingly. Years of careful planning and quiet acquisition were about to unravel in a matter of minutes. The household staff watched from doorways and windows as the search progressed, their whispered conversations creating an undercurrent of anxiety throughout the mansion. Mrs. Williams wrung her hands nervously while preparing tea that no one seemed interested in drinking. The gardener paused in his work outside, sensing the tension that seemed to emanate from the house itself. Even the estate's dogs appeared restless, pacing the grounds as if they could feel the disturbance in their normally peaceful world. As they approached the staircase leading to the second floor, Morrison paused to ensure his team was ready for what they might discover. The jewelry room had been described in detail by their informant, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. The captain's experience told him that they were close to a breakthrough that would either vindicate their investigation or create a constitutional crisis of unprecedented proportions. The climb up the staircase felt interminable, each step bringing them closer to a moment of truth that would change everything. The portraits of previous estate owners seemed to watch disapprovingly from their gilded frames, as if sensing that the established order of things was about to be dramatically disrupted. At the top of the stairs, Camilla hesitated for just a moment, her hand resting on the polished banister as she gathered her courage for whatever was about to unfold in her private sanctuary. The jewelry room door stood before them like the entrance to a treasure cave, its polished mahogany surface gleaming under the hallway's crystal chandelier. Camilla's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she reached for the antique brass handle, knowing that opening this door would likely seal her fate. The room beyond had been her private sanctuary for years, a place where she could admire beautiful things away from the constant scrutiny of public life. As the door swung open, morning light flooded the space through tall windows draped in ivory silk curtains. The room was breathtaking in its elegance. Glass display cases lined the walls like museum exhibits, each containing carefully arranged pieces of jewelry that sparkled like captured starlight. Velvet-lined drawers pulled out to reveal collections of rings, earrings, and bracelets, while specialized lighting highlighted the brilliance of precious stones and metals. Captain Morrison stepped into the room with professional calm, though even he couldn't help but be impressed by the extraordinary collection before him. Diamonds caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the cream-colored walls, while emeralds, rubies, and sapphires created pools of deep color throughout the space. The monetary value of the collection was staggering, but more importantly, several pieces bore the unmistakable hallmarks of royal provenance. Inspector Reynolds immediately began documenting the room with his camera, capturing wide shots that showed the overall layout before focusing on specific pieces. His trained eye quickly identified several items that matched descriptions from the missing royal artifacts list. A ruby necklace that had belonged to Queen Victoria sat prominently in one case, while a pair of diamond earrings worn by Princess Margaret during her wedding were displayed in another. But it was the tiara that commanded everyone's attention. Positioned in the central display case like the crown jewel of the collection, the Queen's personal favorite piece seemed to pulse with historical significance. The cascading diamonds created intricate patterns that had once framed the beloved monarch's face during private family celebrations, while the deep blue sapphires held depths that seemed to reflect the weight of centuries of royal tradition. Camilla stood frozen in the doorway, watching as her carefully constructed world began to crumble. She had told herself many stories over the years to justify her actions, that she deserved these pieces as compensation for years of public scrutiny, that they were safer in her care than in some dusty royal vault, that the royal family had so many jewels they would never miss a few pieces. Now, faced with the reality of discovery, all those justifications felt hollow and self-serving. Morrison approached the tiara's display case with reverence appropriate to handling such a historically significant artifact. The piece was even more magnificent in person than in the photographs he had studied. Every diamond had been cut and set with master craftsmanship, while the sapphires seemed to hold the deep blue of ocean depths. The tiara represented not just monetary value, but the personal taste and memories of Britain's longest reigning monarch. The captain carefully lifted the piece from its velvet cushion, turning it to examine the identifying marks that had been catalogued by royal experts. There on one of the larger sapphires was the tiny scratch that had occurred during a cleaning decades earlier. The inner band bore the specific engraving that marked it as part of the Queen's personal collection, not the state crown jewels. These details left no doubt about the tiara's true identity and ownership. Camilla finally found her voice, though it came out smaller and less certain than her usual confident tone. She began explaining that the tiara had been a gift from the Queen herself, given during a private moment when the late monarch had expressed her desire for Camilla to have something special to remember her by. The story was creative but lacked documentation or witness verification, and everyone in the room understood it was a desperate attempt to create plausible deniability. Inspector Reynolds continued his methodical documentation, while Sergeant Davies secured the scene and maintained a detailed inventory of everything they were observing. The professionalism of the team stood in stark contrast to the emotional chaos that was clearly building inside Camilla. Years of royal protocol and public composure were being tested to their absolute limits. The other pieces in the collection told their own stories of gradual acquisition over many years. Some items showed signs of recent cleaning and repair, suggesting they had been actively maintained and enjoyed rather than simply hoarded. A diamond bracelet that had belonged to the Queen Mother sat next to a pearl necklace once worn by Princess Anne, creating a timeline of royal history that had somehow found its way into private hands. Mrs. Williams appeared in the doorway, her face pale with shock as she took in the scene. The loyal housekeeper had always wondered about some of the more magnificent pieces in her employer's collection, but had never dared to question their origins. Now, seeing the official investigation unfolding in the jewelry room, she realized she had been caring for stolen royal treasures without knowing it. The weight of evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Each piece Morrison's team examined bore the specific identifying marks that proved their royal provenance. Detailed photographs were taken from multiple angles, while official documentation was prepared that would be needed for legal proceedings. The meticulous care with which Camilla had maintained the collection now worked against her, as the pieces were in perfect condition for identification and authentication. As the discovery phase of the operation concluded, the atmosphere in the room shifted from investigation to the grim reality of legal consequences. The Queen Consort of England had been caught red-handed with stolen royal artifacts, including the beloved personal tiara of the late Queen, Elizabeth II. The implications extended far beyond simple theft. This was a betrayal of trust that struck at the very heart of the royal family and the institutions they represented. Morrison began the formal process of seizing the evidence, knowing that each piece would need to be carefully documented and transported back to secure royal facilities. The tiara, along with the other confirmed royal pieces, would be removed from the estate and returned to their rightful place in the royal collection. For Camilla, watching her treasures being catalogued and removed, it must have felt like watching her entire world being dismantled, piece by precious piece. The formal arrest procedure began with Morrison reading Camilla her rights in the same drawing room, where she had initially tried to maintain her innocence. The ancient walls that had witnessed centuries of genteel conversations now bore witness to the downfall of a queen consort. As legal formalities played out against the backdrop of silk wallpaper and ancestral portraits, the grandfather clock continued its steady ticking, marking each moment of this unprecedented constitutional crisis with mechanical indifference. Camilla's composure finally began to crack as the reality of her situation became undeniable. The woman who had spent years perfecting her public image, who had weathered countless scandals and emerged as a respected member of the royal family, now found herself facing criminal charges that would destroy everything she had worked to build. Her hands shook as Morrison explained the charges against her: theft of royal property, handling stolen goods, and conspiracy to defraud the crown. The process of inventorying and removing the stolen items took several hours, with each piece requiring careful documentation and secure packaging for transport. The late Queen's tiara was placed in a specialized case that would protect it during the journey back to royal custody, while photographers captured every angle for evidence purposes. Watching her prized collection being dismantled and removed, piece by piece, was perhaps more painful for Camilla than the arrest itself. News of the operation spread quickly through the tight-knit network of royal staff and security personnel, though strict orders had been given to maintain absolute secrecy until official announcements could be made. The implications were staggering, not just for Camilla personally, but for the entire royal family and the stability of the monarchy itself. King Charles III faced the unthinkable situation of his wife being arrested for stealing from his own mother's collection. The estate staff watched in stunned silence as their employer was led to the police vehicle that would transport her to London for formal processing. Mrs. Williams wept openly, her loyalty to Camilla warring with her shock at the discoveries made during the search. The other household employees gathered in small groups, whispering about what this would mean for their jobs and whether they might face questioning about their knowledge of the collection. Inside the secure transport vehicle, Camilla sat in silence, staring out at the countryside she had called home for so many years. The rolling hills and ancient oak trees that had provided peace and privacy now felt like witnesses to her shame. She thought about the phone calls that would need to be made, the explanations that would be demanded, and the public humiliation that awaited her. The woman who had once been vilified for her role in Charles's first marriage had finally overcome that reputation, only to destroy herself through her own greed and entitlement. Back at Buckingham Palace, emergency meetings were being convened to manage the crisis. Constitutional experts, legal advisors, and senior courtiers gathered to discuss the unprecedented situation of a queen consort facing criminal charges. The palace press office began preparing for what would undoubtedly be the biggest royal scandal in decades, knowing that every word of their statements would be scrutinized by media outlets around the world. King Charles himself was informed of the developments while attending to official duties at Windsor Castle. The news struck him like a physical blow, as he realized that his wife, the woman he had fought so hard to bring into the royal family, had been systematically stealing from his mother's personal collection. The betrayal cut deep, not just as a monarch whose treasures had been violated, but as a son whose mother's memory had been dishonored by someone he trusted completely. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once Camilla arrived at the secure Metropolitan Police facility in London. Fingerprints were taken, photographs were captured, and formal charges were filed that would soon become public record. The woman who had once been photographed wearing the crown of Queen Mary at her coronation now faced the possibility of prison time for stealing royal artifacts that were infinitely more valuable than most people could comprehend. Media outlets began picking up hints of unusual activity around the royal family, though the full scope of the story remained under tight security restrictions. Royal correspondents who had covered the family for decades sensed that something significant was developing, but palace officials maintained their silence while legal procedures continued to unfold. The pressure to contain the story was immense, as premature disclosure could compromise the investigation and legal proceedings. The other members of the royal family were quietly briefed on the situation, each struggling to process the implications of Camilla's actions. Prince William and Princess Catherine received the news with shock and concern about how this would affect the monarchy's reputation. Prince Harry, despite his estrangement from the family, would soon learn that his stepmother had been caught stealing from his grandmother's collection, adding another layer of complexity to already strained family relationships. International implications began emerging as diplomatic channels buzzed with concerns about the stability of the British monarchy. Commonwealth nations that recognized Charles as their head of state expressed private worries about how this scandal might affect their own constitutional arrangements. The theft wasn't just a criminal matter. It was a crisis that could undermine the very foundations of monarchical authority across multiple nations. As evening fell over London, Camilla remained in custody while lawyers worked frantically to understand her legal options. The evidence against her was overwhelming, with photographic proof and expert authentication making denial impossible. Her only hope lay in negotiating some form of plea agreement that might minimize the damage to both herself and the institution she had helped to represent, the royal collection. Experts worked through the night to verify the authenticity of each recovered piece and assess what other items might still be missing. The late Queen's tiara was returned to its proper place in the royal vaults, where it belonged among the other treasures that represented centuries of British history and tradition. The violation of trust was complete, but at least the stolen artifacts were finally coming home. The kingdom slept uneasily that night, unaware that their queen consort sat in a police cell, contemplating the ruin of everything she had spent her life trying to achieve. Tomorrow would bring public revelation, media frenzy, and the beginning of legal proceedings that would forever change the face of the modern British monarchy. The morning newspapers exploded with headlines that sent shockwaves around the world. Queen consort arrested for theft dominated front pages from London to Sydney, while television news channels provided wall-to-wall coverage of the unprecedented scandal. The carefully managed image of the modern monarchy crumbled in real time as details of the investigation emerged, revealing the systematic theft of priceless royal artifacts by the woman who had stood beside the king at his coronation. Buckingham Palace released a carefully worded statement acknowledging the ongoing legal proceedings while expressing the royal family's cooperation with the investigation. The language was diplomatically neutral, but those familiar with royal communications could read between the lines. This was a complete disavowal of Camilla's actions and a clear signal that she would receive no special protection because of her position. The institution would survive, even if it meant sacrificing one of its most prominent members. King Charles faced the most difficult decision of his reign as he grappled with the personal and constitutional implications of his wife's crimes. Legal experts advised that Camilla's position as queen consort would need to be formally reviewed, as someone facing criminal charges for theft from the crown could hardly continue to represent the monarchy. The man who had waited decades to become king now found his reign overshadowed by a scandal that threatened to undermine everything he had worked to achieve. The recovered tiara was examined extensively by royal historians and gemology experts, who confirmed not only its authenticity but also provided new details about its significance to the late Queen Elizabeth II. The piece had been a personal favorite, worn during private family celebrations and intimate moments that were never photographed for public consumption. Its theft represented not just a financial crime, but a deeply personal violation of the Queen's memory and the family's private grief. Public reaction was swift and merciless. Opinion polls showed devastating drops in support for the monarchy, with many citizens expressing disgust that someone in such a privileged position would resort to theft. Social media platforms buzzed with angry commentary, memes mocking the royal family, and calls for the abolition of the monarchy altogether. The scandal provided ammunition for Republican movements across the Commonwealth, who argued that hereditary privilege inevitably led to corruption and entitlement. Camilla's legal team, led by some of Britain's most expensive barristers, struggled to develop a defense strategy for charges that seemed ironclad. The photographic evidence, expert authentication, and witness testimony created a case that was virtually impossible to challenge. Their only hope lay in negotiating a plea agreement that might result in a lighter sentence in exchange for cooperation and the return of any other stolen items that might remain undiscovered. The investigation expanded as authorities realized that the theft had been ongoing for years, possibly beginning shortly after Queen Elizabeth II's death, when access to royal properties was temporarily less secure. Other royal residences were quietly searched, while inventories of the entire royal collection were conducted to determine the full scope of what had been taken. The systematic nature of the theft suggested careful planning and intimate knowledge of royal security procedures. Staff members from various royal properties were interviewed as potential witnesses, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust throughout the royal household. Long-serving employees who had dedicated their careers to royal service found themselves questioned about their knowledge of missing items and their interactions with Camilla. The investigation fractured relationships and destroyed the family-like atmosphere that had traditionally existed among royal staff. International media coverage intensified the crisis, with foreign newspapers and television networks providing detailed analysis of how this scandal might affect Britain's global standing. Diplomatic sources reported concerns from allied nations about the stability of the British monarchy, while Republican movements in Commonwealth countries seized upon the scandal as evidence that monarchical systems were inherently corrupt and outdated. The financial implications became clear as experts valued the recovered items at tens of millions of pounds, making this one of the largest art thefts in British history. Insurance companies that covered royal properties began their own investigations, while security firms contracted to protect royal residences faced intense scrutiny about how such systematic theft could have occurred, undetected for so long. Family dynamics within the royal household became increasingly strained as the full implications of Camilla's actions became clear. Prince William and Princess Catherine distanced themselves from the scandal, focusing on their royal duties while privately struggling with the betrayal of trust. Other family members found themselves forced to choose between personal loyalty and institutional survival, with most ultimately prioritizing the monarchy's long-term stability over individual relationships. As weeks passed, additional evidence emerged suggesting that Camilla had been selling some stolen pieces through discreet private dealers, using the proceeds to fund her lavish lifestyle and property improvements. Bank records revealed suspicious transactions that corresponded with the disappearance of specific royal artifacts, creating a paper trail that further strengthened the prosecution's case. The late Queen's tiara was eventually put on public display at the Tower of London, where visitors could see the recovered treasure and learn about its historical significance. The exhibition became a pilgrimage site for those who wanted to pay their respects to Queen Elizabeth II's memory while witnessing a tangible symbol of how the royal family had fought to protect their heritage from internal corruption. Months later, as Camilla's trial date approached, the monarchy began showing signs of recovery from the scandal. King Charles had demonstrated strong leadership by supporting the investigation and refusing to shield his wife from justice. Public opinion slowly began to shift as citizens recognized that the royal family had acted with integrity when faced with criminal behavior in their own ranks. The final chapter of this extraordinary story would be written in the courtrooms of London, where a queen consort would face judgment for her crimes against the crown she had sworn to serve. The recovered tiara, once again safely in royal custody, stood as a testament to the enduring strength of British institutions and the principle that no one, regardless of their position or title, stands above the law.